Dead Man's Tale, one of the most iconic weapons in Destiny, literally was the meta. Then Bungie nerfed it, and then nerfed it again, and then again. Most recently, though, update 6.2.0 came out, which affected DMT's strongest trait, which is Cranial Spike. Essentially, Cranial Spike no longer buffs damage versus players, and instead, it grants increased reload, aim assist, and range per stack. It also states that it still grants additional damage versus PvE combatants, but we're gonna get into that in just a moment. And upon reaching max stacks of Cranial Spike, which essentially is ×5, the catalyst will now increase the hipfire rounds per minute by 50, essentially allowing the weapon to fire at 180 rounds per minute when shooting from the hip. But it will deal reduced damage per bullet by 20%. Now I know there's a lot in this update, but let me just be real. Dead Man's Tale wasn't just nerfed, it was massacred. This scout rifle has been utterly destroyed. And I have to ask, why? Bungie, Sandbox team, you guys have been doing pretty good doing these surgical nerfs, these small little tweaks. So why in the hell did you kill DMT, Bungie? And yes, you killed it. Fellas, let me just take you back down memory lane. February 2021, Season of the Chosen, when DMT first entered the game. And it was so nasty. It had crazy hipfire accuracy, could easily 2-tap Guardians. You can also take to the air with it with Lion Rampants. We had our Sky Cowboy build, but just a few months later on June the 6th, Bungie went ahead and nerfed a few things. They removed the hipfire damage scalar, was 1.8 times to match Doom. They also reduced aim assist cone and angle hip scalars from 1.5 to 1.2. Now, we still played with it. I still thought it was really good. Yes, it was a nerf. Before the update, DMT was maintaining reticle stickiness, accuracy, and crit potential all the way up to 65 meters. But post update 3.2.1, damage fall off from the hip landed around 42 meters. And landing crits at high range in hip fire mode was much harder with this update. Simultaneously, it was also harder to use on controller versus PC. Now again, DMT was still usable. It still had its damage buff from Cranial Spike. Reticle stickiness, although not up to 65 meters, still lasted up to 42 meters, which was still very good. But in order to mitigate the differences between controller and PC, December 7th, 2021, update 3.4.0 improved the consistency in hipfire with the catalyst. They also increased reticle friction fall-off distance, less recoil, and improved accuracy. Now this update was made because with the previous update, Bungie did see a dramatic decrease in usage rates on consoles. And these changes were essentially meant to reverse that trend so that it was easier to use on controller while maintaining its ease of use on PC. Now, this was a buff for PC players as well. We even brought that up that, hey, DMT was feeling even better. Considering DMT already felt good on PC, this resulted in Sky Cowboy getting even nastier. And being able to run around from the sky and hit 2 crits with a TTK of 0.4 second, my lord! Granted, hipfire felt much better on controller after this update, but not as good as PC. And despite the changes, reticle friction for controller players would dip somewhere around 25 meters, despite the patch note changes in accuracy buffs, which brought us to February 22nd, 2022. A mere year after this weapon was introduced to us, Bungie did the unthinkable. They reduced the catalyst hipfire rate of fire from 150 to 130. Now, I was still trying to promote DMT, but that was a significant nerf. I say that DMT is still very good, but that you would have to use it more as a scout rifle versus using it like a long last word. Hence why its nickname was actually the long word. Honestly, I thought where it was after that point was completely balanced. I thought DMT was in a good state. It wasn't too overpowered. You could still use it in its hipfire form, but simultaneously, because it was inherently a scout rifle, you would want to use it more as a scout rifle. In terms of lethality from a year before, Dead Man's Tale was noticeably worse, which brings us to August of 23rd, 2022 with update 6.2.0, and this is where Bungie, you lost me. You changed Cranial Spike's effects, where it no longer buffs damage versus players, seemingly out of nowhere. Now granted, I know you're buffing aim assist and range per stack, and we're gonna get into the PvE damage numbers in just a second, and I know I talked that maybe, just maybe, with Cranial Spike ×5, we can run around with a hip-firing scout rifle shooting at 180 rounds per minute. But here's the problem. Even with the increase in aim assist and range per stack, I still feel like the scout rifle's hipfire capabilities is just piss poor. Even on PC, outside of 30 meters, you really don't want to be hip-firing all that much. You want to start aiming down sights, especially in that 35 to 40 meter range. And before somebody jumps up and says cross, that's the way it's supposed to be. It's a scout rifle. Listen, the long schlong was meant to be used as such. And to mitigate its inconsistencies when shooting from the hip was Cranial Spike's damage buff. That increase in damage was super nice. Now though, no increase in damage, which is all but killed this scout rifle for me. Dead Man's Tale is a 120 round per minute scout rifle, meaning it has a TTK value of 1 second. It's not good. And the main reason why people used it still, even after its previous nerfs, was that it did have the ability to at least work your way up to getting that damage buff and getting the potential 2-tap. And of course, it's consistency, primarily from the hip, which shoots at 130 rounds per minute. So its hip fire time to kill value is still 0.92 seconds, which is still not that good. Even if Bungie was to reverse things and put it back up to being a 150 while shooting from the hip, you're still looking at a 0.8 second time to kill value. Again, its biggest benefit was the increase in damage that it gained in combination with that increase in hip fire. But Bungie has nerfed all of those things, making Dead Man's Tale a mere shell of its former self. But Cross, what about Cranial Spike times 5? What about the TTK there? Well, you have a reduction there in damage. Secondly, it's still going to require 3 crits in order to get the kill, at least on most Guardians. Needless to say, the best possible outcome for Dead Man's Tale with little to no forgiveness is 0.67 time to kill from the hip, which by the way is not easy to do. I played so many games with DMT, and you know how many times I would get times 5 Cranial Spike to turn around and look for an enemy and have literally nobody in front of me to take advantage of Dead Man's Tale and Cranial Spike times 5. You see, Bungie came in here and they nerfed the damage, but they did not buff the duration of Cranial Spike at all. And even inside of 6v6, where you think you could take advantage of max stacks of Cranial Spike, rarely do you ever get the opportunity to see that come to fruition. Not only that, just shooting from the hip in general, even in the previous sandbox, wasn't the wisest thing to do with Dead Man's Tale anymore. You wanted to back up. You wanted to use it like a scout rifle because its hipfire consistency, even for mouse and keyboard players, had dipped significantly. But wait, Cross, didn't it get a buff in PvE? Isn't this weapon all around better in PvE? I'm so glad you brought this up because the answer to that is a hell no. Tell me when the hell this happened. Now, granted, this was back in 2021 when I last pulled damage values for DMT, but essentially, per stack with Carl, damage would go up somewhere between 6.5% to 7% per stack. However, yesterday we went inside of a lost sector and started calculating damage values. And what did we find? Damage only went up 3% per stack? The hell is this shit, Bungie? And I know in the sandbox patch notes, the way it's made out, it's like, yo, you're gonna get 180 rounds per minute when shooting from the hip once you reach Cranial Spike times 5, and it still grants you additional damage versus PvE combatants. Here's the thing though, it's not as much damage as it used to grant. Secondly, hip firing inside of PvE is not as easy to do. It's not even easy to do inside of PvP, but inside of PvE, where you've got so many ads unloading on you, flinch really affects hip fire accuracy amongst accuracy in general, but especially hip fire accuracy. And I know Bungie has like a flinch rework coming soon, but by God, it's got to come fast because this ain't it. On top of that, being able to shoot this scout rifle at 180 rounds per minute, but with only a 3% buff per stack, capping out at only a whopping 16% increase in damage versus what it used to do, which was a 40% damage buff at Cranial Spike times 5, it doesn't even matter to me that this weapon is shooting at 180 rounds per minute. Half the shots you're going to be missing anyways because you're shooting from the hip. Secondly, have you reloaded DMT? It's 2 shots at a time. You can't even hang on to Cranial Spike times 5 long enough to reload your magazine full. And even if you could, you would just run out of ammo way too fast. Personally, I think this nerf is really uncalled for both PvE and for PvP. I'm not sure when the damage nerf actually affected PvE, but the fact that it's worded that it still grants additional damage versus PvE combatants, but at the same time, it went from granting 6 to 7% damage per stack to now only 3% tells me, Bungie, you're being kind of sneaky here. A nerf's a nerf. And this is by far a nerf for PvE and for PvP. It's a massacre at all levels. And inside of PvP, if I want to use a scout rifle, I'll probably just use Jade Rabbit over DMT. And inside of PvE, DMT is not even worth its exotic slot to me anymore. A couple of things that needs to happen in order for DMT to be up to par. Either A, completely reverse the damage nerfs. Give Cranial Spike its damage back. Or B, rework the exotic catalyst. Not only does the catalyst increase hipfire rounds per minute, but it also increases aim down sight rounds per minute. You see, this is a scout rifle, and a lot of times inside of PvE, you are backed off from enemies using your scout rifle. If you're gonna give us 180 rounds per minute, allow us to take advantage of that increase in rate of fire, both from the hip and aiming down sights. Hell, if we hit all crits perfectly, we only have 9 shots to take advantage of that increase in rate of fire. And what would be even better is if the exotic catalyst refreshed our mag upon reaching Cranial Spike times 5, thus allowing us to hang on to those stacks even longer. And before someone says that would just make DMT way too strong, no it wouldn't. I'm telling you guys, it would not. Right now, in its current state, I'm blown away with how bad this scout rifle is, considering where it started in Season of the Chosen and where it is now in Season of the Plunder. And this nerf that hit DMT, in my opinion, came out of nowhere. For the entirety of last season, DMT was only on the top 10 meta list twice in Trials of Osiris. 2 times. One of those times, it was literally the number 10 slot on Distant Shore, and on Eternity, which is obviously a scout rifle map, it was number 5. But the weapons that are obviously outclassing DMT at every level when it comes to being a good range option include the likes of Jade Rabbit, include the likes of No Time to Explain. We already saw a shift away from Dead Man's Tale. So why in the hell did DMT get dealt with in such an egregious way? At this point, I feel like I'm a defense attorney defending exotic weapons and why they just got their asses blown out. But that's exactly what happened to DMT. Overall, the scout rifle has been destroyed, massacred, and I would suggest putting it in your vault, forgetting it ever existed. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.